This week, I sit down with David Manheim to discuss the AI alignment problem. Does AI present an existential risk to humanity? Will AI kill us all?
But I think that there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we've figured out how to build systems that are smarter than us safely. And I think that there's a really strong argument that the default mode for doing this ends catastrophically. That like making something that is smarter than you that disagrees with you does not end well.
Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Your engagement is what makes these podcasts possible. We have a number of exciting episodes coming up that address topics such as digital twinning and using AI in the enterprise.
This is the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast with your host, Stephen Walther, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I am so excited today. We have David Manheim here. He's actually calling in from Israel. And we are going to be talking about existential risk, a fun topic. I want to start by providing a quick bio. David Manheim works with academics and policymakers to reduce risks from future large-scale catastrophes. He is currently involved in understanding and building policy to mitigate large-scale risk to humanity in different domains, focusing on biosecurity and artificial intelligence alignment. David was also one of the original super forecasters involved in the Good Judgment Project, which I personally think is super cool. We'll have to talk about that coming up. And he is the founder and head of policy and research for ALTER, a great acronym for the Association for Long-Term Existence and Resilience. Thank you, David. Thank you for joining us today on the show.
Absolutely happy to be here.
Well, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. I just took a trip back from Austin to Seattle. I was on a plane for 4 hours and I downloaded all your papers. I spent the time going through. It was great. No, they're really good. There are a lot of different areas that I learned about. So I really enjoyed it. But I mean, it did strike me as an odd area to devote your life to. That's not meant as a criticism, but just means, I mean, it feels like if I understand sort of your project, sort of your life's work and stuff that you've been doing, you're very, very focused on understanding existential risks to humanity. And let me pause there. Make sure, is that an accurate portrayal? And how do you sleep at night? I guess is the question.
Yeah, so that's a fair question. So first of all, I think it is one of the things I focus on. I think I focus on it a lot because I think it's relatively neglected. I do other work as well. We're working on trying to get Israel to iodize its salt. We're doing, some work on general public health stuff. There is some other stuff I do. I don't tend to write papers about it. I don't know. It's important, but maybe not as interesting.
Hmm.
Um, I do think that there's a lot to be done on risks, but the nature of risks is you're not sure if they're going to happen, and I think, yeah, I sleep fine other than my kids waking me up. I'm not a pessimist, but like if there's a risk, it makes sense to address it. I don't think this is any kind of Pascal's wager, like if there's a 1 in a million chance that something happens. I spent a lot of time working on pandemic preparedness and risks starting in 2012 or so when I started grad school, more kind of towards the end and also after grad school, before COVID. Yeah, not because there was definitely going to be a pandemic, though it turned out there was one, but because there are lots of things that can happen and we should probably be prepared for them. Um,
So what are your thoughts on, do you think individuals, institutions, governments, do you think they spend enough time worrying about these risks? I mean, it's one of those things. I've had a lot of conversations because I've been looking forward to talking to you about this, about like the nature of these existential risks, because it feels like there's certain risks like aliens invading and destroying the earth that are like, you know, I mean, that's one type of risk where it's like it's never happened in the course of humanity. It's hard to think about that. And then there's the other one, like pandemics, which happen, you know, pretty frequently every whatever certain amount of time. So do you think it's valuable to think about these risks? And do you think we're devoting enough time to thinking about it?
So yeah, I think among individuals who are aware of the issue, um, I think most worry too much personally,
Hmm.
especially because like worrying isn't productive,
Right.
right? Like not getting sleep does not make anybody better off in terms of addressing whatever risks exist. Um, that said, I think most institutions and governments are unfortunately myopic. Um, they have a hard time focusing on things that aren't immediate, and the economic and political and other incentives kind of push pretty hard against focus on large scale or longer term risks. Some of that for good reason, but I think it means that there is underinvestment in uh, a lot of things that either look weird or aren't immediate or are unlikely in in the strange sense that like people said Trump being elected in 2016 was unlikely because people were predicting it was like a 1 in 3 or 1 in 6 or 1 in 10 chance. That's not unlikely, but like it
Yeah.
was less than 50%, so it's unlikely. So that's not what we prepare for. Um, and yeah, if you're only preparing for things that are greater than 50% likely to happen, you're thinking too little about the risks.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Well, let's jump right into the main risk that I wanted to talk to you about today, the one around AI. And originally came across your name when on I guess it was the Less Wrong forums. There's a whole sequence of of posts involved with sort of AI alignments, existential risk to humanity, which I know you were very involved in that project. Um, I want to ask about, first off, what was the overall kind of goal of that sequence of posts, and what was the story behind it? How did you get involved in it? How did you get a group of people focused on this problem?
Yeah, so I think the story behind it goes back a while to just the general question of, hey, there are a bunch of people who are worried that there might be large scale or existential risks from AI. Why are they worried? What is it that they're worried about? Um, why do even people who agree with each other seem not to agree with each other at all? And the debates on this seem to be fractal. Every time you think you have two people who agree with one another, there's something they disagree about.
Yeah.
So I think I've been thinking about this and talking about this for a while, even before the project. And then the kind of motive for the project came from the person who kind of started the work, R.A. Englander, who was really interested in modeling this uh, quantitatively and accounting for all of the uncertainties and thinking about how do you deal with the types of uncertainties that exist when it's not just the like object level uncertainty about what will happen, but it's an uncertainty about like which model should you be using or what types of things should we be thinking about. Um, and yeah, I think that so we weren't looking at will AI kill us, which obviously is kind of a concern people have, but it's also we're looking at why do people disagree about what the trajectory is or how it happens, and I think that some of the work is still referring to things that are pretty far off, and some of it has already been resolved with the pace of AI progress. Um, so yeah,
I mean, I guess one of my big impression is, oh my God, this stuff is complicated. That there's so many, because I was kind of hoping, I'd look up AI risks. There'd be some sort of number at the end. I'd say, oh, okay, so there's, 28% chance of extinction of humanity, but it's more like, and I think that's where I saw a lot of the value in those posts. Was it was clarifying, as you said. I mean, there's so many different like types of, like you talk about all the different types of AI. You talk about whether, how rapidly it will advance, whether it'll be explosive advancement or not. And you talk about all of these different, possibilities that come into play when calculating this stuff out. And, I kind of like, I don't know, I kept like shaking my head, feeling overwhelmed when reading through it. I guess one big question is this the type of thing that can be modeled accurately at all, or is it just too complex? And are there certain things that are like, because I appreciate, I know you're using what Analytica, you're using this software to try to create a concrete model and figure out the nodes and the dependencies, and that I really appreciate it because I understand how complex it is. But at the end of the day, do you think that we'll get to a point where we can start like having enough information that we can make actual policy decisions based off of this, or is this just too messy of a domain to be working in?
Yeah. So you started by saying you were hoping that there would be a number, and I
Yeah.
think that, to be controversial here, there is a number. It's just one that everybody disagrees with each other about. So it's we're pretty sure it's between 0 and 100%. Like I'm pretty
Thanks,
strong
David.
about that
Thanks,
one, but
David.
yeah. So I think the problem is that there are lots of things, and you said it's very complex. People talk about plans are useless, planning is essential.
Yeah.
I think that doing a really good job thinking through issues is very valuable, even if you don't get really great answers. I think that, as we've seen over the past couple of years, the pace of AI progress has accelerated, and some of the things that people worried about AI early on, were concerned about, were just completely off base, and some of them were absolutely spot on. um, Having thought through the issues is helpful. Not because you get everything right, but because you've thought about them. Um,
Well, I'm curious about that.
I,
Like, what's an example of something that was completely off base that people were worried about?
oh, so I think there was a lot of um, assumption that when you built a thinking machine, the thinking part would be something that you understood
Mm.
to some extent, um, that could be improved in some straightforward, coherent way. Um, Language models don't don't work like that. Um, we know a lot about how they work, but we don't have the ability to kind of there's no dial think more, or think better that you just
Right.
kind of like flip up and suddenly, so some of the assumptions about, like, once AI exists, because humans were able to create it, if it is as smart as humans, it will then be able to improve itself. And that will accelerate because, each marginal gain, and the way that feedback works definitely does not happen for language models the way that many people kind of implicitly or explicitly assumed. On the other hand, I think lots of the speculation about, well, what are the different ways that it could be better than human? It could be better able to cooperate. Not really. It could be faster than humans. That's definitely the case. It could be more easily parallelized. It could be, so there are a lot of things that, yeah, no, that's exactly how we actually use these models. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of stuff that was right, a lot of stuff that was wrong. I think, yeah, there's a lot to say about prediction generally. Maybe we'll get to that later, but I do think that um, it's a problem, uh, thinking that you can like put everything in a model and have the answers, and at the same time, laying it out was, you said it was kind of overwhelming thinking about all the different pieces. It was overwhelming for me also. Like there's a
Sure.
lot there.
Yeah.
And it was still really helpful to think through what the different questions are.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, I mean that was the most valuable part of the post for me was just understanding all the different conflicts and the different positions people have and where, all the sort of like I don't know. I mean, even stuff where there are even stuff in the posts about like making analogies between human intelligence and machine intelligence and talking about how rapid evolution and I found all this stuff about like how much information is encoded in human DNA, fascinating and using that to try to figure out whether there could be, specialized algorithms for intelligence. I mean, there was a lot of interesting digressions in those posts, which I found, super, super interesting.
To
Yeah,
be fair, I reviewed and edited
yeah.
all of them, but most of that was not me. It was Ben Collier and Daniel F. and Sammy Martin, and so like there was a team of us that were all working on
Oh
this.
yeah. No, no. It was an impressive,
But yeah,
impressive team output, impressive project, lots of territory covered. So yeah, really recommend that people read through it. Even though this point that was written back in 2021, we just talked about some of the new understandings we have, and I guess I wanted to leads me to my next question. I mean, I guess I'm still trying to get my head around is forecasting sort of the dangers of AI possible? And, I have to think of analogies. I have to think like, you know, if, for example, David, if you were transported back to 1945, right before they detonated the atomic bomb, and I know, there are some people standing, I think I got that date right. Anyway, I'll have to check on that. If you, if you were transported back, I mean, there were some people who were worried, I guess, that it would ignite the atmosphere in the oceans and destroy all of humanity and be really, really bad. So, not a good thing to do. But, is that the kind of thing that could have been predicted or not? Is that something that we could, like have could you have gone back and warned people, I mean, or reassure people that you're not going to blow up the earth by doing this, or, or you brought up the example of the pandemic, which you said that you were doing a lot of work on before. And so I guess I just have a general question about like how useful forecasting is, because I don't really have a good grasp of, how accurate this stuff is in predicting stuff in the future. So, I guess part of my question too, just to make my question more complicated, is forecasting AI dangers different in kind from forecasting things like pandemic dangers or other types of things that you might be trying to forecast?
yeah. So a lot there.
Yeah,
I guess the first thing I think the story with Teller warning about maybe igniting the atmosphere is disputed about exactly what happened when and who raised the concern and whether it was completely answered beforehand. So
okay,
there's a whole, which I think illustrates that predicting the future is hard. Even figuring out what happened in the past is pretty
yeah,
tricky. So like there's a lot. There are some limits to what we can manage. Um, I don't think that I could have done. I am completely sure that if I had gone back there, I would be worse at physics than everybody at Los Alamos in trying to figure out what it was that was happening with the nuclear reactions
yeah,
and maybe igniting the atmosphere. I could not have given them any, except with my foreknowledge that like the atmosphere didn't ignite. I couldn't have said anything useful.
right,
But um, there are different types of uncertainties, and this is actually a really great example because um, they talk about different classes of uncertainty. So some uncertainties are aleatory, come from the Latin word for dice. Like it's a roll of the dice.
yeah,
How good could somebody get at forecasting dice rolls? Um, Probably not
yeah,
better than 1 in 6. Like they're just there's not a lot you can do there. Um, in theory, could you do better? I saw Leaf K. Brooks say jokingly, the only luck is quantum randomness. Everything else is prediction failure. Like you, in theory,
Right.
could you like determine the states of all the particles in the universe? Uh, no, in theory, you still can't. But I think that there's there's the kind of true random stuff that you can't figure out. Then there's the stuff that you don't know.
Yeah.
Will a nuclear bomb ignite the atmosphere? Was not random at all. We just didn't know the answer. There was no true uncertainty there at all. It's just that we couldn't get to the information we needed to answer it beforehand. Um, and it's one of those risks where, as a number of people have pointed out, you don't actually want to try it to figure out
Right.
whether it's
Right.
going to go wrong. Like that is the wrong way to do this.
Use the
Um,
experimental method.
right.
Right.
It'll
Right.
get you the right answer. You
Right.
just might not be around to get
Right.
that
Right.
answer.
So appreciate it.
So
Yeah.
I do think that there's a piece there where, yeah, we could you predict this in advance. In that particular instance, yeah, they kind of they solved the equations and they figured out that it was at least very unlikely. Um, Predicting pandemics, people ask, could the pandemic have been predicted? And the answer is it could have, and it was, and lots of people had been yelling about it for a long time. This was not a surprise.
Yeah.
Which of those is AI like? People disagree, shockingly. But I do think that there are some aspects of the question that are absolutely amenable to being predicted well, and some parts that really aren't. Um, if I'd gone back to 1945, I would have had a lot more intelligent things to say about the geopolitics of nuclear weapons than I did about the physics. Um, and there's a lot of stuff that mattered there over the coming decades. Um, I often say if you had told somebody in 1950, 1960, yeah, by the way, everybody's still going to be around in 70 years. There are going to be a lot of nukes. A bunch of countries are going to have them. Nobody will have used them in 70 years. People would have said, no, but like actually,
Right.
like that's
Right.
not even a plausible guess about what the future looks like. Um, so I think that tells us two things. The first one is when people think about a risk and take it seriously, they can in fact change the outcome.
Yep.
And also, it's hard to know exactly how or what it looks like. That's that's kind of a fundamental part of the forecasting. So again, can we forecast exactly what the risks are? No. Can we be better prepared by thinking through them? Yes. I think that's straightforward.
So let me ask. So as I said before, I'm super impressed that you're a super forecaster, one of the original super forecasters. And I'd love it if you would explain what that means. But I'm also, I guess it also opens up a larger question because you've said a couple times that because you have limited knowledge of physics, you probably wouldn't have been super helpful if you transported back in time in 1945. But I guess one of the things I'm wondering about is it seems like a lot of your work that you focus on and a lot of the value that you bring to the table is that this idea that there's a discipline and certain skills that people can develop that allow them to make better predictions than most people, even without like specific domain knowledge necessarily. And I'm curious about that. Is my understanding, I'm assuming that if I went to you to make a prediction about the future, you'd be able to do a much better job than, I don't know, if I was doing it, just because you have some specialized skills and specialized knowledge and specialized abilities. But let me go back to the original question. What is a super forecaster and what makes you special?
Yeah. So what makes me special? All sorts of things. My wife makes me feel special.
Nice.
I think that the first piece is really simple. Is you know Tetlock did some early work on expert political judgment. It's the name of his first big book, about like, hey, it turns out that political scientists like don't forecast well. Like they say things will happen and they don't, or they won't happen and they do. Like, why do experts suck at this?
Right.
And in fact, why do they do worse than like the really naive, simple model of like, what are the odds that a revolution happens in this country? Well, look at how often revolutions happen across the world. Like, what's the average on over countries, and just like use that as the number, and that does better than experts a lot of the time. And that seems like a pretty low bar.
Right.
The what super forecasters do is better than the super low bar of base rates, better than most people, because most people, it's a skill like most skills. If you work at it, you can get better. And what Tetlock found was that the top 2% of forecasters outperformed others significantly. And when he looked over time, it's not as though the 2% kept on changing. Like, it was, there were some people who routinely did better over the course of a multi-year tournament. And I will say, partly for me, that was luck. Not luck that I got the answers right, but luck that I started the tournament just as I was starting grad school, and I had a bunch of time that I was able to devote to forecasting. Forecasting ability does require a couple of different things to do well. Obviously, like, there's some part that's just intelligence and looking at doing the research and looking for the numbers and trying to figure out what the base rates are. There are a bunch of actual skills about, like, how do you think about changing your mind over time? Do you change your mind when you get new evidence? A little bit at a time. Like, you don't just say like, oh, it will happen. Oh no, I've changed my mind. It won't happen. But like, it's 40% likely. I saw this new thing, maybe 43%. Okay, I saw a couple more things. Actually, I'm going to go all the way up to like 55. And you kind of routinely revisit your estimates. One of the things that requires is a bunch of time, as I said. And that's, I think part of what distinguished good forecasters from not as good forecasters, which is how much time they spent. And then the last thing that I think is really critical and unfortunately rare among people who make predictions is caring more about getting the right answer than about feeling good about what they said, or being embarrassed because they changed their mind. And yeah, and if you have a reputation to live up to, then like it's harder to like care a lot about getting the answer right, as opposed to like not looking dumb.
Right.
I'll say I do a lot less predicting nowadays than I did at the time. And I guess I'll leave it up to you to guess if it's because I'm a lot busier or because I have more to lose if I get things wrong, because now I'm called a super forecaster.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I found that actually when reading about super forecasting, that was one of the things that fascinated me. This idea that a lot of the qualities that we say that leaders have, being decisive, not changing their mind, setting a direction, having all of that seem to actually be at odds with making accurate sort of decisions long term about products. Sometimes I don't know. Am I understand that correctly? Because I feel like you want your leader in your organization to have a strong vision, get everyone behind it, stick to that vision no matter what. If there's hurricanes and tornadoes and whatever, they keep having the troops move forward. But it seems like a lot of the stuff that I was learning from like reading about super forecasting was no, you have to be super open to changing your mind when new data arrives. Am I thinking about that in the right way?
So there are two pieces. Julia Galef has a book, Scout Mindset, where she talks about two different mindsets. There's soldier mindset and scout mindset. Soldier mindset is we have to go over there, we have to do this. It's a fight. We
Yeah.
have to win. We have to like have in our head exactly what we're going to do and just do that no matter what. It doesn't matter what people tell us. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And then there's the scout who hopefully goes out and says like, wait, whether or not the plan is to go over the bridge. I should check whether the bridge is there. Because if the bridge is not there, I
Right.
need to go tell people, because maybe they should change the plan. Startups don't do well when they have like, this is the vision and we will not change it. They actually, like, startups need to pivot until they get something that works.
Yeah.
but they also need to not be paralyzed by like revisiting and reworking and refiguring what it is that they're doing. There's certainly a place where marginally updating and trying to redo your plans every 20 minutes is a lot more expensive in terms of the time and effort than it is worth. So I do think that there's a lot of value in kind of traditional leadership of like, this is the path and we're sticking to it. I also think that there's a lot of value in listening when the scout says, hey, there's no bridge there. Can we not go over it?
Right.
So I do think that, it's a little bit more complicated than that, than, which of these two should you do? But in general, I think that there's a lot of room for different people to have different roles in kind of,
That makes
I,
sense.
I, I don't want to lead armies.
Right.
That seems like a really bad idea for me. I'm super personally risk averse. Like when I play poker, I start getting nervous because there's like, a couple dollars on the table and like, oh no, what if I lose?
Right.
I can afford it, but I get,
Right. The whole loss aversion
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
that's a bad trait in like somebody running a company.
Right.
It's fine if what you're doing is predicting. So yeah, it's just a different skill set.
So moving the conversation back to technical risks, one of the papers that I read that you worked on was the fragile world hypothesis. You're talking in that paper about you talked about Nick Bostrom. I know he's done a bunch of stuff on existential risk, and you talk about several sort of analogies for talking about technical risks. And I thought those analogies really kind of, I don't know, it made it more concrete in my mind. And I was hoping maybe you could go through them. You talked a little bit about like the Nick Bostrom's urn for thinking about technical risks, and then you had something that I thought was even more interesting, the sort of exploit robot analogy for thinking about it. Can you talk us through what those
Yeah.
analogies are?
So there's a kind of very, very famous, very old model thinking about probability of drawing different colored balls from urns, and if you draw a red ball, how likely is it that it's this urn versus this urn? And if people remember their probability class from high school or college, maybe they remember doing some of that. Bostrom had a really clear analogy. He said, okay, so imagine that future technologies are a bunch of balls in an urn, and there are, to keep it simple, two types of balls in the urn. There are white ones, and those are all the ones that we have drawn out to date. And those are technologies that like help us. And then there may or may not be some black balls in the urn, which are ones that if we pull them, everybody dies.
Right.
And we should not pull one of those black balls. That seems bad.
Yeah.
And so conceptually, he was trying to think about what the impact of humanity of different discoveries is, and kind of talked through some scenarios where there are black balls in the urn, and what would they look like? What would they be, and what are the risks?
And
So
so part of the question here, I'm assuming, is that like AI, like I don't know, ChatGPT, OpenAI might be a black ball. That's kind of the
ChatGPT is some color gray at worst, or GPT-4, 3, 4, or they're
yeah.
not in themselves certainly anything like existential risks. The next version of GPT is vanishingly unlikely to be an existential risk. There are lots of risks
Yeah.
of the models today and in the near future. But the question was, what if the model that you build is actually self-aware and decides that it wants to wipe humanity out, and that would be a very different type of thing than thankfully than any of the AI systems that Annuity's built today. I thought that the analogy was useful, but also very limited. there's a lot of work in computer science and theoretical computer science talking about explore, exploit trade-offs. And so the robot model that I talked about is based on a lot of actual work that people have done in AI safety about, okay, so what does it look like to explore an environment? And usually the way that you formalize this is by saying, okay, so the reward could be, anywhere from -5 to 50, and you have to, decide where you're going and whether you want to like sit on the places that give you a little bit of reward, or you want to look around to see if maybe there's something better. And the problem is that if there are any spots on the board that are like black holes where the reward is negative infinity,
Right.
then suddenly it's really, really hard to talk about like, should you explore? Probably not.
Right.
Probably you're safe
At
where
that
you
point,
are.
I want to be a tree. I don't want to
Yeah,
explore at
that
all.
isn't
I don't want
bad.
to. Yeah.
Right, so that's that. But the general question of how to do explore exploit is really, really difficult. I love this story. I think I mentioned in the paper, but when they first looked at what they call multi-armed bandits, which if you think about like a slot machine, you have a bunch of one-armed bandits. If you have a bunch of arms and you have to pick which one to pull, well, each machine might have a different payoff. Some of them may pay off less often, but a ton more money, or more often, but less money, or more often and more money. And you don't know until you've like pulled the arm a bunch of times. And so the question is like, how do you deal with, and this is a very, very general formulation for lots of types of decision problems. So what should you do? And the mathematical formulation was first kind of brought up in World War II, and it's a hard problem. And so I'm quoting from the paper that I cited. The suggestion was made that the problem be dropped over Germany as the ultimate instrument of intellectual sabotage, because the mathematicians spent so much time and they're like, there's nothing, like we've tried a lot of things and we just can't figure out what to do here. Like it's just a fundamentally hard problem. And I think that this gets back to the discussion before, like, so what are the risks? How do we know? What should we do? And the answer is, this is deeply uncertain and we don't have great answers. And, to the extent possible, if you're that robot, see if you can look at least a step ahead.
Yeah.
Try and think about what the landscape might look like. Pay a lot of attention. But yeah, if you want a fully general solution to the problem, there isn't one.
I've been one of the impressions I've had. So I've talked to a few other people about the alignment problem, and I've always come back to, okay, should we go back to huddling in caves and stop all technological progress? And oh, you're also shaking your head. No, I've been surprised about the level of optimism that people have, and I guess I'm curious why shouldn't we go back to our caves now? I mean, now that we're kind of more aware of these risks of technologies like nuclear weapons, mustard gas, I don't know what, all these biological weapons, and the potential negative outcomes of AI.
People did not live better lives in caves than they do today. It's just like going back there seems
Yeah,
like a really bad plan if we know it was worse. You could ask the, I think, much more reasonable question: should we stay exactly where we are,
yeah,
not let technology develop any further? And the answer to that is both. No, I think that there's a lot of technology that like we should keep developing because it'd be really great if we could do some of the things that are certainly within reach in terms of medical treatments and enhancing productivity. And look, right now people say like we should degrowth and like stop with the if we spread all of the money that is being made every year among all the people who are currently alive, I would be a lot poorer. You would be a lot poorer. People in sub-Saharan Africa would be better off, but like not well off. There's just not enough wealth to like maintain a good level of the standard of living for everybody in the world, and that's really tragic. And like we should fix that. That said, but also don't go off a cliff.
right.
Like it would be very bad if things went badly. So I do think that there's a lot of room for what's been called differential technology development, and being smart about risk mitigation. And I know people at OpenAI and Anthropic and DeepMind and and Microsoft, and all of the different firms that are developing and they're actively working on risk mitigation, because there are risks
Yeah.
that are foreseeable, and we need to mitigate them. How much does that type of work deal with the existential risk of superhuman AI systems that could theoretically exist in the future? Unfortunately, really little.
Okay.
I do think that there's a piece where we can see that there's a cliff somewhere.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly how far away it is, and we should be cautious about that. But being cautious does not mean stopping the car, getting out, and spending the rest of your life living where you are.
Well, so one of the things that came up over and over again in the posts was around trying to predict high level machine intelligence. And there's a lot of different terminology used there. I know the posts use the terminology high level machine intelligence. I know it's also been referred to as human level machine intelligence. There's transformative AI, there's super intelligence, transformative AI, singularity. I don't know. There's a lot of these different terms that kind of cluster together in my mind as, related concepts. But I was hoping that you can help me kind of understand why did that project that you worked on, why did they align on using high level machine intelligence instead of, I don't know, people use super intelligence or some of the other terminology.
Yeah, so I think we keep on having a problem where somebody comes up with a definition of what future AI systems would look like, and then people say, so could you give us a rigorous definition that's one that you could say in 10 years this happened or it didn't happen?
Hmm.
Artificial general intelligence, and people said oh, we'll know what that is, we'll see, we'll try and have a conversation with it, we'll do the Turing test, and if it passes the Turing test, that was a bad, that didn't work,
Right.
that's not general intelligence. Current language models can pass.
Right.
The best way to trip up a language model on a Turing test is asking it lots of hard questions, because humans can't know the answer to all of them, but language models do. That is a bad method of figuring out. Okay, so how do we define what it is that we're looking for? And so every time people come up with a definition, we're like, well, that's not a great definition, and we might not even know if we have it. The goal for defining a new term was trying to say, we're not trying to talk about these unfalsifiable definitions. We're trying to talk about, so in this case, what if there was a machine that could do all economically relevant activities as of at this point 2021, as well as humans. So it turns out that there's a lot of stuff that probably wouldn't have made it on the list for economically relevant activities, like dreaming up new types of video, from whole cloth, that AI systems can do. But the idea was, okay, so we have now a pretty clear definition of what it is that this would be, and we could probably check a box, this does or doesn't qualify. And the idea was that would be a reasonable instantiation of what it was that we kind of meant by general intelligence. But I think it's a hard question, it's very closely related to the problem of prediction. If we knew what future AI systems looked like, we could say, this is what it is that we're talking about, but we
Right.
don't, so we can't. That's a big problem. I don't know what to say other than, we don't know what the future looks like, so we can't tell you exactly what it looks like. I do think that a lot of the terms are useful in different ways or confused in different ways, and I think that there's a lot of, again, going back to there's lots of disagreement about what it is that people mean or meant or should mean by the different terms. And yeah, I think a lot of the debate that happens, unfortunately, and this is one of the things that we were like thinking about trying to address, is people were talking past one another and still
Yeah.
are very often, when they say like, well, artificial general intelligence is impossible because AI systems only output text. And wait, no, like we didn't mean one-shot language models that have no chance to respond to anything. We meant like future systems that could do more than that. Or current models are already general intelligences because they can pass the SAT. No, that's not like
Yeah.
it's a very hard problem when everybody's using terms in different ways that aren't clear. So I hopefully high level machine intelligence, human level machine intelligence, whatever term you want to use. Hopefully these are helpful in at least concretizing what it is that we are trying to talk about.
That makes sense. I mean, I noticed one of the things that came up in some of the posts was the question of whether there's even a such thing as general intelligence, which I think you were touching on just now. And the whole, is, I mean, because we do, and the other thing that came up in some of the posts is there one sort of common algorithm, I guess, for intelligence, or is it a bunch of specialized circuits? And I know there's a bunch of different research in neuroscience that suggests, oh, it might be, we have specialized circuits that came out of evolution for solving particular problems we ran into. And so all of those things make it, again, very hard to understand. I mean, we used to have in my introductory philosophy classes, we'd all learn about the Turing test. It was super simple. Once it passed the Turing test, and you say these things are intelligent. But yeah, as you point out, that's actually not such a great test, and it's complicated. And there's also the whole issue of like, you know, these intelligences that we're creating might be so different from human intelligence. They might just seem completely alien to us, but we still want to treat them as intelligent if they're able to do things like, take over the world. That would be probably something that we would be concerned about. So I guess, how do you, because I know, sorry, this is becoming a long question again. I know, from the super forecasting stuff, how important it is to have something that can be provable or not, because otherwise it's hard to do forecasts. And so, do you think that we can get to a point where we have a agreed upon definition of high level intelligence where we have enough to be able to make forecasts about these things? Or is this just something that, again, there's always going to be so much sort of, disagreement about, that's going to be hard to get anywhere?
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to this. The first one is there such a thing as intelligence? Yes. Can we define it rigorously? No. There, done.
Thank
Long
you.
question, simple answer. But I think there are a couple of important caveats here. There was a post from I think Hacker News a while ago where so they said like, well, how can you build something if you don't even know like what it is? And so somebody posted in response, Mog, what truly is fire? The divine blessing stolen by Prometheus, concentrated phlogiston? Is it madness to seek to create something we don't have a definition of? Grog rub 2 6 together really hard. Like we created it.
Right.
Can you define? I mean,
Right.
I can strike matches. How well can I explain
Right.
the chemical reaction that causes the soot particles to fluoresce? A little bit, like
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I don't need to.
Right.
So I think that yeah, it's very clear that there is something that we mean by intelligence. That it's got some general capacity. Defining it rigorously is hard, and yeah, and that doesn't change the fact that it's a thing that we need to deal with. But I think you're absolutely right about the problems with predicting, and one of the big problems with prediction, I think generally to be useful, is when you ask a question, even if you get the correct answer, that doesn't help you if it wasn't what you meant.
Right.
You get an answer to a question that wasn't exactly the one that you meant. So somebody asks, in what year will AI pass the Turing test? And somebody tells them, 2023. And they're like, okay, so there will be AGI in 2023. You're like, nope. Turns out,
Right. Right.
nope, wrong
Right.
question. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, I certainly don't have a better answer than others about what this is. On the other hand, I think that it's very difficult to defend the claim that AI systems can't be generally intelligent. Not now, but in the future. I think it's just very hard to defend the claim that like there's something in physics that happens in my head that can't that isn't uh, emulatable in lots of different ways on computer hardware. One of which would look something like language model plus a bunch of other things. And I don't know what those other things are. Nobody knows what those other things. But like it seems hard to argue that there's no way to get there.
Right. Well, I did want to ask about, I like how you refer to these in the post, the failure modes, the different, really, really bad things that could happen if things go totally wrong, and the things that we're worried about around existential risks. And there are a number of different failure modes that you point to, and I'm just curious about like I mean, so what is the big fear? What's going to happen here? What are we trying to prevent? I mean, if again, like the atomic bomb, yeah, blowing up the whole atmosphere and the ocean and destroying the earth is pretty straightforward. It's a little harder to see, like, if Sam Altman comes out with Chat GPT 12, how that is going to lead to the extinction of humanity. So what are people really worried about here?
So I think that there are a bunch of distinct things, and I think that it's important to be clear that, first of all, not everybody agrees about this. And second, there are a bunch of things that I think should be pretty widely agreed on as actual risks. The first thing that's an actual risk that everybody should kind of be on the same page about is people can misuse these models potentially in very, very dangerous, scary ways. Current models cannot teach you how to build a bioweapon in your basement unless you already know how to build a bioweapon in your basement. But they're not, you know, unimaginably far from being able to guide you to doing that. They're certainly not particularly far away from being able to guide people to, build bombs, just
Yeah.
regular bombs. Terrorist groups. One of the reasons that there are relatively few terrorist attacks is that like building bombs is actually kind of hard, and most of the time when people try it the first time, it's also the last time that they try it because it doesn't go well. Yeah, if
That's a
language
nice
models
feature
can
about
help
our
people do
world.
that,
I like that.
yeah, it's nice that most of
Right.
the people who try and do very bad
Yeah.
things end up meeting very bad ends before
Yeah.
they can do that. But I think that the misuse risk is real and immediate, but also like much scarier in the coming years. I think that there's uh, a very clear place where if we can build machines that are generally intelligent, um, they can also have much, much scarier failure modes related to having goals that don't align with humans. And people say like, well, but nobody is going to build an AI system that has a goal that isn't like well thought out. And I said, have you ever met a software engineer? Because they do lots of dumb and like they do impressive things also, but
Right.
like the idea that nobody's going to do the dumb thing is just crazy in my mind. Um,
Right.
there are lots of places where we build systems that are not great for humans, and it's very hard for humans to stop doing those things, even when we know that they're bad and dumb. Look at politics. I don't care what your political views are. Look at politics, and you'll find lots of examples of like why people are being dumb about lots of different things. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of failure modes out there. most of the most worrying failure modes are not possible until you get machines that are more generally capable than at least the average human.
Yeah.
And they're not there yet, and you know, I'm happy that they're not there yet, because I know that we don't have solutions to a lot of these things. But also, I think this does not mean, you know, these are not black balls from Bostrom's urn. They're not, you know, immediately we will all die if you invent a machine like this. But I think that there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that we've figured out how to build systems that are you know, smarter than us safely. And I think that there's a really strong argument that the default mode for doing this ends catastrophically. That, like, making something that is smarter than you, that disagrees with you, does not end well. Exactly how? Eliezer Yudkowsky has an analogy he uses. He said, you know, you're going to play Gary Kasparov, you know, you're going to play a grandmaster at chess, and you know, how is he going to win? And the answer, I have no idea. I'm not a good enough chess player to have any. He will crush me. He will absolutely destroy me. I don't know how. You know, can I tell you how exactly it goes wrong? I don't know. And smarter than people than me also say, like, yeah, there are lots of ways this could go wrong, and we don't know exactly which way it will go wrong. Which tells me that there's a bunch of work to do in terms of making sure that, like, when we build systems like this, they are safe and well controlled, and lots of other things that OpenAI and other companies are doing some work on, though, frankly, I think for lots of very understandable but unfortunate commercial reasons, are much less than I think may be required to solve the problem.
Well, so let me push back a little bit on, because you said just a moment ago that you don't think we're in a situation where we might pull out a black ball and cause the end of humanity, and that we're not, at least in the near term. And I guess I want to question that, because it feels like a lot of the capabilities that we're discovering from things like large language models are emergent, unpredicted, a lot more reasoning capabilities, ability to write, whole programs, ability to, reason through very complex stuff. And I'm starting to talk to more and more like philosophers who are claiming, oh no, this is actually human-like intelligence. It's showing human creativity. These are emergent properties. What would prevent, I mean, we have GPT-5, it's on the horizon, it's going to come out, and how do we really know, given how little we actually understand how these models are able to do the things that they're doing, how much emergent capabilities they have? Doesn't that put us in a position where we might end up with, GPT-5 or 6, that all of a sudden these new capabilities pop out that allow it to do things that are beyond what humans could do, and could provide, the AI with, I think you refer to it as, what is a decisive strategic advantage, is the one of the things that you talk about in the papers. How do we actually get our minds around, forecasting those types of risks?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is, I think I said after GPT-3 came out, somebody asked, is GPT-3 an existential risk? And I said, probably not. And they said, okay, but I said, and GPT-4 probably isn't either. And GPT-5 probably isn't either. Like, I don't know.
Right,
I
right,
don't know
right.
where to, I didn't know where to draw the line then. I don't know where to draw the line now. I do think but we should start getting more and more nervous over time about this,
Right.
especially if we don't have much more robust ways of controlling these systems, which there are people working on. But yeah, I can we be sure that this does not end disastrously? No. Do we need to exercise an extreme degree of caution around these systems? Yes. Uh, where exactly does the caution belong? I think that there are a bunch of places where we have a fairly strong degree of understanding. I think that, you know, OpenAI and METR and others have done tests to try and figure out, okay, so like, can this get out of the box? And the answer so far is no, not even particularly close. As the answer starts being probably not, or maybe, then like we need to go a lot slower and be a lot more cautious. How sure am I that we will stop before we get to the edge? Not at all sure. I think that it's very, very hard for companies to ignore the commercial incentives to move forward as risks get larger and larger. And that is very worrying. I'm glad that Sam Altman, among others, has said very clearly that like we do need regulation of these systems. We do need a lot of uh, safety measures. I think I heard Sam say at one point, we absolutely cannot afford to build systems that are smarter than humans until we are absolutely sure they are safe.
Right.
Yeah, that seems like really solid advice. We can't afford to take large risks of doing so. We should be cautious. OpenAI should be cautious. But I think that this is all, how confident am I in any of this? Not incredibly, and I certainly don't think that like this means that everything that is happening is incredibly dangerous right now. But I'm not optimistic that everybody stops in time. I think that more caution would be good. More caution does not mean don't do anything, but it does mean pay a lot of attention and don't do some things.
Okay. So given that you're not advocating huddling in caves, which I understand the argument there because we're getting a lot of, you know, more flourishing, more happy people. That's good. Let's keep this technological advance going. There'll be more happy people on Earth. Um, there are some real risks here. The black balls from the urn that we might go pulling out at any moment now. If I were to give you $1 billion and you could use that $1 billion to, reduce some of these risks, how would you use that money? What would you do with it? How would you enable us to navigate the next, I don't know, 50 years as AI keeps getting more and more advanced? What should we be doing? Where should we be investing? How do we make sure that these things don't, go off the rails and we don't end up accidentally destroying all of humanity, which I think we're both agreed would be really bad. So how can we prevent that?
50 years is I think optimistic as a time frame to be particularly sure that we can manage this. I think that a number of people have said if anybody has an idea that will cost them tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to do that would like really seriously have a strong argument to significantly reduce risks of these systems, let them know because the money's actually there.
Yeah.
I actually don't think if I had $1 billion, I think the ARIA program for provably safe AI is something that I'm cautiously optimistic about. I think that I'm not going to try and explain a bunch of stuff that I don't understand about provability theory and how it is that this would work. But I do think that there's a bunch of work there that is really exciting. People can look up. I think Guaranteed Safe AI. It's a UK government program under ARIA that they're working on. That I'm excited about. I think that there's a bunch of work on testing and evaluation. I think there's a lot of work on governance that is very important. Unfortunately, I heard what may be an urban legend about somebody with a bunch of money who said, like, what can we do to reduce nuclear weapons risk? And they said, well, you can fund some studies about it. And they said, no, but like if I had like $1 billion, what would I do? It's like nothing. What, you're going to go to Russia and say, I have $1 billion, give up your nukes? Like
Right.
it's not enough money to make any difference. If I had $1 billion, could I could I buy all the AI companies and tell them cooperate instead of race to make AI first? No, it's not even close to enough money.
Right.
So I think that there's a bunch of stuff that needs to happen. I think that a lot of it needs to be a global consensus that we need to have lots more caution rather than an individual or a small group or a bunch of money trying to chase a single solution.
So how do you recommend that people learn more about this? How do they keep up with the research? What's the best way to, I don't know, are there certain organizations, certain resources, certain books? What's the best way for people to keep informed?
Yeah. So I think that there's a huge amount of different work of different types on this. I think that there's a lot of really good work being done by UK AC, the Artificial Intelligence Safety Institute, and the US AC that's still a little bit earlier on in the process of getting things started, but is also starting to do good work. I think that there are a number of different research groups. Stuart Russell's group is doing some work. I think that there's a lot of different work on technical AI safety that I'm not as familiar with. So I guess if you're a mathematician who really wants to work on provable AI safety, then you should get in touch with people like Paul Cristiano and ask him or David at Aria's Guaranteed Safe AI and ask them what types of things should you be working on. And there are some write-ups about what you're working on. If you're a computer scientist that wants to work on this, there's a lot of stuff on building tests and deriving bounds for machine learning behavior. It's a huge. Thankfully, it is a huge field that lots of people are working on a lot of different approaches for. I could spend another 20 minutes trying to list off lots of things that people could be looking at. I don't know, and it would not be anything like a complete list.
That's great.
I guess.
No, thanks for the Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Closing thoughts are, I think that there's a huge amount to be done in terms of making sure that these systems are safe in the future. I think that there are a lot of risks, and to go back to something that we said early on, I'm optimistic. I do think that humanity as a whole is likely to try really hard to figure out these risks and has at least a decent chance of succeeding. And maybe that puts me, I don't know. I feel like it puts me solidly in between the accelerationists and the doomers, probably closer to the doomers. But yeah, I think that's where we are.
So I gotta say, David, I feel much better after talking to you today, because I was really nervous I'd be talking to you and you'd be saying, "Oh, we're all doomed." And so, I like your cautious optimism but also your awareness of the risks that we're getting to. So thank you for spending time today. Really appreciate it. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the OpenAI Changes Everything podcast, where we explore how OpenAI is transforming the future of humanity. Please remember to subscribe to ensure that you receive future episodes.